my name's Nadia, and essentially I'm one of the coordinators of the reading group. My fellow coordinator is Hanifa. The other sisters are on their way, and essentially we founded this reading group and we made it like a public initiative after kind of realizing that it is worth having these discussions, respectful and critical discussions. And we've had like really good responses so far and really good feedback. I really appreciate the feedback that people have been sending me, on a weekly sort of basis from what we've had, from the 3 sessions that we've had. So, like I said, following on from our discussion last week, I want to thank you all personally for reaching out with constructive and respectful criticism, and we appreciate the advice, and we will bear it in mind for subsequent sessions. There's just a few house rules that I just want to highlight ahead of this discussion. So essentially our speaker cannot be interrupted, and instead we will allow our speaker to finish the entirety of the presentation. Any form of rudeness or disrespect towards the speaker, you will be asked to leave, and we are allowed to exercise that right. And like I said, if need be, and if we do have like subsequent disruptions, we can move the venue of our event where it is obviously only registered people will be able to attend, and people who have RSVP'd, like our policy is that you do have to RSVP in order to attend our session. Everybody here has done exactly that with the exception of one person. So in this reading group, we welcome anyone who is willing to engage in critical and respectful discussion pertaining to decolonization. This group is a safe space for Black, Brown and Muslim people, and no prejudice of any kind will be tolerated. If you disagree with the speaker, then you are welcome to respectfully engage in discussions through an academic scope, preferably with academic references. All our speakers put a great deal of work into their presentation, and we respect and value their contribution. Our speakers are highly qualified and engage with Fanon's work through a critical scope, and we ask those non-Black, Brown people present today to listen and respect and learn. We are a grassroots education initiative, and we prioritize non-white voices as they are the first-hand victims of colonialism. Please respect the chairperson. I'm the chairperson. My name's Nadia. Particularly when mediating or pausing for reflection, the chairperson may ask you to center your talk from time to time if they feel that the discussion is deviating from the original subject. One of the feedback that I received from consecutive sessions was that certain voices are continuously dominating the discussion, so I am going to start introducing new voices, so not everybody will be picked for discussion this week, because I want to hear from everybody, and sometimes we're getting like certain actors within this group dominating and like polarizing discussions, so we will have like brand new voices hopefully to lead off our discussions this week. So, we encourage contribution in a respectful manner, and if you like to make a contribution, raise your hand and avoid disrupting the chairperson. You don't shake your hand, you don't call my name, you don't do any of this, and this is happening in last sessions where individuals were obviously being extremely rude and sort of ill-mannered. We encourage contribution in a respectful manner, so like I said, just raise your hand and don't interrupt. We would like to ensure that both our brothers and sisters contribute equally, so you may be asked to sum up your points if you exceed the time allocated in the discussion segment. The structure of the session is as follows: 2 hours. If you do leave early, feel free to do so just quietly and respectfully. This 30 minutes or so dedicated to the speaker segment. Speaker may finish early or may finish slightly beyond the 30 minutes, and that's perfectly fine. Approximately 30 minutes,
less.
No problem.
I'm not
Yeah, that's
that
cool. That's fine. And then obviously we will open up for discussion. We would like to keep in touch the old-fashioned way. So obviously we've asked for your email addresses, so we can actually add you to the mailing list. So unfortunately I had some problem this week actually, so I do apologize if we didn't get the email for this session, because I was having some technical thanks. We were having some technical problems unfortunately with that. So please remember to RSVP for the session. If you don't RSVP, then you won't be able to attend. It is a policy, because if we use the university grounds, then I need to reserve places and make sure that we have a backup, because I always back up and book the communal area, and essentially I normally have to detail who will be attending and have a contact for them, i.e. an email address. So you do have to RSVP. If you don't RSVP, you can't attend the session. Most importantly, we are here to learn and share from each other in a relaxed environment. So let's enjoy the experience. And last, just 3 things is that obviously we will be taking pictures. I understand there's 2 people. Nabila, are you this? Because last week you said,
was me,
yeah, that's fine. So Santino, it's just Nabila and Talha who won't be.
Okay,
Oh yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Sorry sis, what's your name?
Shamima.
Shamima. So just 3 people, but everybody else that which we can
Okay.
film discussion, but just 3 people. Yeah. Is it okay if I can ask you to move there? Only because then it will be just those 3 people, easier for the cameraman to identify who won't be in the filming.
So when you move the camera, you don't.
Yeah. Because then it will just be, so it will just, it's easier for you, Santino,
So
so
maybe
it's
for
just
you,
those 3 people.
easier. Yeah. That's,
Yeah. So, yep. So let's get started. Everybody can introduce themselves first, I suppose, before Awqa does her segment, if that's all right. So, Hanifa?
My name's Hanifa. Me and Nadia came up with this idea, but she's the one doing all the work for it, so that's cool. I've got a background in just doing some charity work in anti-terror law, which is what got me interested in this kind of genre, you could say. And that's it.
I'm Javeria. I studied at SARS for 3 years and I work for youth and education charity in Waterloo. I've just been interested in anti-colonial studies for a number of years, particularly for my studies.
Hi, my name is William, and same, I have an interest in decolonial studies.
Hello, my name is Roland. I'm Ned. I work in a law library in Holborn. I was attracted to this reading group because hearing Franz Fanon, I believe that he has a lot of very rich material that we can use today for dealing with social inequality.
Hi, I'm James. I'm doing my PhD in English at Birkbeck.
Hi, I'm Nisha. I came to Fanon through poetry, and I'm very excited to talk to everyone about decolonisation.
Hi, my name's Hamja. I'm an activist mainly dealing with prisoner campaigns and the war on terror. I'm also artist and curator. I do a festival called Awqa Cultures, and I'm writing a book called Shy Radicals, which is about Fanon for shy people.
Kenny. I'm a student at the moment, and I was reading Wretched by myself, and then I found out about this reading group, so that's why I'm here.
My name is Anna and I'm interested in mental health.
Hi, my name is Ayan and I'm a science editor, and I've for a long time wanted to do some stuff on, read some stuff on decolonisation, so perfect opportunity.
Can I introduce myself?
Yeah, you can introduce yourself. Yeah. That's fine.
Should I just start now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So if you just think a bit louder.
first up.
We're starting now. So yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm just going to read off this here because I'm still not great at talking just off the top of my head.
No, that's fine.
Firstly, thank you to Nadia for inviting me to lead this week's discussion. I'll be honest with you, I tried to read this book after reading Malcolm X's autobiography, and after Malcolm X's way of expressing himself in a very plain way, Fanon's way, type of language completely baffled me. But obviously I came back to his book for the sake of this study session, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, thanks again for getting me to come back to Wretched. So yeah, my name is Awqa Colque. On my bio, I describe myself as being of mixed Aymara origin, as my mother is an indigenous Aymara woman of Bolivia in South America, and my father is white British. I was born here, but I definitely don't plan on dying here. So, Fanon's excellent analysis of the problem of alienation between urban and rural colonised peoples is something that we should not only study, but something we have to put into practice. I personally believe that this chapter in particular is almost a warning to us to not fall into the same traps that our people have been falling into for centuries. It's a warning to not alienate ourselves from our people, to not allow ourselves to be defined by European colonial labels, and to work with all of our people in a non-paternalistic or maternalistic manner in order to bring justice and prosperity to everyone and not just a privileged minority. We cannot, as Fanon says, lose touch with any sector of our communities, and instead of seeing one another as foreigners, we have to make it clear-cut who the real foreigners are. The Europeans are the real foreigners on our lands, and as Fanon rightly puts it, the foreigners must leave. Let us build a common front against the oppressor and let us reinforce it with armed struggle. Identity plays a key role in building this common front. If we allow our identities to be shaped by the colonizers, then we are bound to stop seeing who the real enemy is and waste time fighting in between ourselves. But of course, we have to take note of when our own people are sellouts. Opportunistic false friends who don't want to completely destroy the oppression we face, but make it more comfortable for themselves and their friends. And how do we do this? Fanon comes to the logical conclusion that violence is inevitable. However, in my humble opinion, while violence is inevitable back home, I don't think there's any point of us spilling our blood here on an island that does not really belong to us. I believe it shows a deep and unnecessary investment into the state of this country, of its people, the majority of them being white British people, who generally would never spill their blood in order to improve conditions for us back home. We must spill our blood where we want to take power, and I strongly argue that we must focus on taking power on our homelands, not anywhere else, that being political, economic power. And Fanon also highlighted the need for this action to be backed up by ideological maturity. Our struggle must be based on a clear set of objectives, a well-defined methodology, or the recognition by the masses of an urgent timetable. If this isn't present, then everything is based around emotions, and when the oppressor starts being superficially nicer to us, we are disarmed psychologically, and any trivial handout satisfies us. Liberation comes with three main components: organization, ideology, and violence. These three things will help us not fall into the trap that Fanon also warns us about, the trap of liberal reformism. So it's not surprising that the issues that Fanon brought up are also problems we face in South America and in Bolivia. For example, he talks about the nationalist political parties who don't have the majority of the population's interest in mind, only the urban proletariat, and that they look down on the peasants. And in Bolivia there have been many parties like this. One example is the MNR, the National Revolutionary Movement, which was founded in 1941. Despite the word revolutionary in their name, they were nothing but reformists and led by middle-class intellectuals, precisely the kind of people Fanon points out. The MNR, despite supporting strikes in the cities and mining centres and being left-wing, tended to see rural comrades as children who must be led, who didn't have a voice of their own, and any reforms made, which were in the interest of the peasants, had to be fought for. For example, when land distribution and education reforms were carried out. And the confusion of identity has a major role to play in this alienation between the urban proletariat and the peasants. The peasants are seen as indigenous, or indios, while the urban proletariat are seen as so-called mestizos, as people who are a mix of indigenous and European. But what happens is that the imagined European blood overshadows their indigenous roots, and they begin to look upon their own brothers and sisters as aliens. And it is precisely because of this that, as Fanon says, the peasant distrusts the town dweller. People who move from the countryside to the cities suddenly turn into mestizos just because they dress like Europeans and stop speaking Aymara or Quechua and start speaking Spanish. But as I was saying, this party is a perfect example of what Fanon condemns. Over the course of the 1950s, the MNR stopped being so left-wing and started moving towards the right and began cooperating even more with the United States, accepting IMF economic stabilization plans, as they put it. The division between workers and campesinos, peasants, was something encouraged by the leaders of this party. One president did this by exploiting the fact that he was fluent in Quechua. He would also visit remote villages, making empty gestures like giving away footballs, televisions, and bicycles. This division was so heavily felt that when he ordered the killing of 87 men, women, and children in a mining town called Potosi, the campesinos were either against them or completely indifferent. However, when people have ignored this colonial division, we have seen the power in unity between the urban and rural population. Because after all, these divisions are colonial, and in Bolivia you can speak Spanish, but that does not get rid of your indigenous roots. The most famous example of urban-rural unity has to be the uprising in Cochabamba in 2003, where valley and highland peasants, as well as miners and factory workers, and even street kids, all came together to fight off the privatization of their water. And this resulted in Bechtel, a Yankee construction company, being kicked out. Another example is when the people of El Alto, the sister city of La Paz, the capital city, fought against the privatization of gas. Students and transport workers went on hunger strike, and 11,000 peasants marched to the capital city. This uprising ended up forcing the president to flee to Miami. And coincidentally enough, he was the leader of the MNR, the party I mentioned earlier. So you can see how fickle these so-called revolutionary nationalist political parties are. And it was ultimately these mobilizations that paved the way for Evo, the current president, to get into power. And in contrast to previous presidents, his strongest support comes from the rural areas. And this is most likely because he is proud of his indigenous identity and doesn't hide behind the label of mestizo, and most importantly, he is actually attempting to improve the lives of the majority of the population, as opposed to the lives of the European elite. That is not to say that everything has been perfect since he became president. There are obviously still internal disagreements, but they are dealt with appropriately, not with repression and killings. And furthermore, the wealth of the nation is being fairly distributed throughout all members of society, which has led to a massive decrease in poverty, more schools being built, more hospitals being built, more highways connecting the entire country, gas and water being installed in people's homes, and so on. What I would say is that it needs to go past reforms which improve the living conditions of the people and into a complete revolutionary change of the system, so that the opposition parties cannot take over and undo everything that has been done under his leadership. It needs to be solidified, like in Cuba. But now I want to apply Fanon's analysis to here in the UK. Fanon condemns the privileged minority in colonised populations who only seek reforms to the colonial system but do not want to overthrow it. And unfortunately, despite having good intentions, there is a lot of this behaviour in the diaspora. So instead of feeling indifferent when Brexit occurred, because ultimately it makes no real difference to our people back home, a lot of us were deeply upset and affected by it. And instead of demanding that the British government stop looting our land and our people, we march at anti-austerity protests and demand that the government use more of that stolen wealth to make our lives more comfortable here. All of it seems a bit integrationist and reformist. Fanon also points out the need for ideology alongside action. Now, as I've already said, violent action here in the UK, to me, seems futile. But there does still need to be action, of course. Protests, marches, direct action, all of it is necessary. However, alongside that mobilisation, there must also be organisation, and organisation is strongest when ideology is present. Ideology has to guide us in our actions as well as anger and frustration. But when it is solely based around those emotions, then those actions end up being more of a therapeutic release for ourselves, but do not have a role in a long-term process for gaining liberation for our people. And in our case, we must have an anti-imperialist ideology. So I have two questions. How do we apply Fanon's lesson to us, colonised people in the UK, with regards to avoiding the traps of reformism and dividing ourselves? And in applying those lessons, is allying ourselves with the white working class of this country really necessary? Fanon says one thing I do disagree with, which is the following. In the capitalist countries, the proletariat has nothing to lose and possibly everything to gain. I am of the firm belief that the proletariat of Britain have a lot to lose, and since they are major beneficiaries of what is stolen from the so-called third world, I personally do not think allying ourselves with them is necessary, as their interests directly clash with ours. But, as I said, I'm interested in what everyone else has to say.
So I just really want to thank Awqa for that. That was like really powerful, and I just think that we should kind of maybe go around and do what we did last week a little bit. Maybe just share some thoughts on the chapter first. So everybody's individual reading of the chapter, any sort of like themes or ideas that they want to raise, and perhaps then what we'll do is we'll pick up on the talking points that you prepared, and then we'll go into kind of like any question and engagement and things like that. Do you want? Should we go this way? Are you okay?
So right, if I skip.
Yeah, I mean you can skip. Like that's totally cool. Just any ideas. So very focused talking point now, only on the reading of the chapter, your ideas, just themes, things like that. So just like literally the chapter and your engagement with the chapter, and that's about it really. So it was obviously chapter 2. So
I'm not sure. I think I'm interested in the subject of Harb. He's not, and what he's writing about the part of society in the Algerian war, the part that was fighting with the French. So I'm thinking it would be interesting to discuss what could have been done differently, because when the Algerians they won the war and the French they left, so the biggest victim of the war were actually the Algerians who betrayed the cause, because they were the biggest number. Like the Algerians who fought against French, they killed the Algerians who were fighting on the side of the French. So I'm wondering, we could discuss if it could have been done differently, or
okay. Yeah, we'll pick up on that on talking point.
Yeah, how to deal with those who fight with on the colonialist side.
Sure.
Yeah.
What from our own people?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the idea of spontaneity, the way that he sort of talks about the peasants in terms of their emotional outbursts, it's sort of like an immaturity, retrograde, emotional, spontaneous, and I'm kind of curious about I don't know, the sort of, I don't know how to read that treatment, if it's slightly patronizing or infantilizing or something. So I'd like to think more about what spontaneity is, and the way that he uses it in this. Yeah.
I think you spoke about that a little bit in your presentation, the idea that action, if it's emotional. Can you just repeat that in case like you didn't?
Then automatically you act on it, and I think that's what he's talking about. That's present in the peasants, yeah.
And
which is present here as well, and in the general diaspora. So.
And the idea that you said something like direct action, if it's done in a way, obviously, what was it that you said? You said something really powerful. You said ideology is there for guidance and also there to politicize us, to make us angry about our current disposition, and essentially how we can overcome that is obviously it can be different types of resistance. It could be intellectual resistance, it could be obviously like armed resistance and things like that. So he talks about, I think you touched on it really well. You said sometimes that direct action can be motivated solely as a cathartic process as opposed to an actual ideological aim and goal for our people. Ultimately, it could be like, you know, reactionary. It could be just as a thing where we need to release our anger and frustration as opposed to an actual, you know, action that will therefore liberation as a collective. It could be more of a self thing, just release a cathartic thing, you know? So it's just that. So that's really interesting that you point that out, yeah, sure. We'll pick up on that a bit later.
I suppose I had the same thoughts about spontaneity, but maybe along different lines. Where you were talking about the peasants being the most revolutionary class, which I agree with. Definitely. I suppose I just think, is it possible to think about how they can be spontaneous if they are inculcated into the imperialist ideology? I suppose. And just now I was thinking about how you were saying about the individual, the cathartic process. It can be quite spontaneous, horribly, when you branch out, where you try and almost become a sort of transcendental subject, whereby you bring into the world new ideas about the current state of affairs. So, yeah, just thinking about information, there's some possibilities.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Any idea? Any thoughts, sorry?
Well, I'm tempted to pass because I've not read enough of the chapter to say anything.
Well, like, even from what you've read, like, I know that you've made, like, strong points in the past, and I'll be interested in your, like...
I mean, the only thing I want to do is react to the last two people that spoke about the whole idea of spontaneity. I think that generally spontaneity can be a bad thing, because often, as you were saying, that people do react emotionally, and they actually react to something bad that has happened. So, I mean, I can take the example that is closest to my heart is the black community in this country, and to an extent in America. You know, when there is a death, for example, that's when people decide to take to the streets, but they don't strategically do anything in order to prevent such deaths beforehand. So I'm thinking that in this sense, spontaneity is a bad thing, and ideology and strategic planning is a good thing, if I'm to put it simplistically.
Sure, that's really good.
With the communities that I have mentioned, and I'm sure that it's happened with other communities as well, but these are the communities that are closest to me, what tends to happen is, you know, they only react to a bad thing, you know, and it's almost ingrained in them, without an ideology, to be easily placated. So something bad happens, they flare up, you know, and they're given a few drops of hope, and then they calm down again. And there's no point at which they strategically plan for the future in order that those things don't happen again, you know. And it has happened for decades.
Yeah, for decades.
It's probably happened for hundreds of years, you know, 200 years.
Change
let's
is
say.
very incremental. Very, very incremental.
So, applying Fanon's lessons here in the UK, does anyone have any kind of like thoughts, any contributions that you want to make in relation to that talking point? Like, for example, what got me thinking was this, I mean, like, from previous discussions that we sort of had, I know that we have to prioritize that. Personally, I'm kind of a bit conflicted, and my politics are evolving a little bit as well, I guess, but with respect to that, I guess our priority is our homelands, the liberation of our people. But how do we engage with politics here without compromising our, like, I don't want to be involved in, say, like the Labour Party, and then there's many people who are, say, what I sort of I would kind of describe as fairly like soft, and they self-define as like anti-imperialist. but they'll willingly engage in like party politics here in British society, and there'll be like, you know, somebody like Corbyn, he's representing our interests and so on, and he's like anti-imperialist and whatnot. And personally, I think that's a load of nonsense and stuff. But I guess how would you kind of respond to that? This idea of like our ultimate goal, and this is my own perspective, our ultimate goal is the liberation of our people in our homelands, but at the same time, like, we're existing here, like, personally I want to get out too, you know, but like how can we kind of, like, you know, deaths in police custody and other kind of important issues, like the highest rates, incarceration rates in this country of black and brown people, you know, so that kind of thing. How can we kind of address that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
That's obviously really serious issues that we face that we have to address and we have to challenge, but to do it within the context of the fact that this government and European governments in general have been doing this to us for centuries on our homelands and here, and to bring up the fact that we've been forced to come here in the first place because of them.
Exactly.
So to not just demand that, you know, stop killing us, please start being nicer to us, but to also demand basically, we'll try and do as much as we can to enable the complete, to weaken the system here. Personally, I think overthrowing it from within, from here, is quite quite unlikely. That they got their shit together, kind of thing. But then I don't know, personally, for me studying the history back home, things are a lot more volatile, and there can be an uprising and a president is forced to leave. But obviously here, it's, you know, they're more kind of.
And even if they are forced to hear, like, if we look at history, British history or whatever, like abdications or whatever, essentially it's just going to be replaced with someone either.
Exactly.
Worse. Like, I mean, we can kind of use the example of this transition between like Cameron and Theresa May right now in a way, because it's the idea of like he's resigning. It might not
but
be
it made
like
no difference.
Exactly. It's literally made no difference because.
Yeah. Though it would be silly to just completely like detach ourselves from like serious issues like police brutality, but to obviously do it within the to talk about it within the like kind of right context, and also just organise and have an ideology an anti-imperialist ideology that guides us in the way we address those issues.
Yeah.
So, like the brother here said, to be not just reacting to another death that's happened, but to always be like constantly like organising ways to prevent it from happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and there are organisations in the US that do constantly do that. Like the Uhuru movement.
Yeah.
If it did happen that like whatever president in the White House did get overthrown, and then the leader of the Uhuru movement was put in power, they'd know how to basically rule,
to govern.
Yeah, to
they
govern.
have like a manifesto.
But the thing is, they don't even like want that. They want freedom for Africans all around the world. So the thing is, like, it's about stuff like this, like studying and constantly kind of trying to develop your own ideology, so that you're not just reacting to things, but you know that if you ever, once you do actually manage to stop those bad things from happening, and we have power, we know how to basically govern ourselves.
Yeah, exactly that. And like with the Uhuru movement, like, I don't know if you, because I'm going to try and get in touch, and we'll definitely get them here as well, and we'll definitely have, like, you know, engagement properly. But do you know if what their kind of approach is in terms of engagement with, like, I mean, the British branch isn't, I think we spoke a bit about this, they've got a London branch, I think, but in America they're big, they're fairly big. And, you know, how do they engage in kind of like, I know that Black Lives Matter engaged with Hillary Clinton, you had like certain leadership within that movement, like, you know, sitting at the table with Clinton, but
they don't engage.
They don't do that.
They don't
Is it zero engagement?
Yeah.
That's a pretty decent strategy.
Yeah, because they're not about asking for, like Fanon said, trivial handouts to try and
exactly that.
pacify them. Yeah, they just...
Because that can be problematic, because Black Lives Matter, there was this whole kind of, thing on, we had this like thread on my page, and people were saying, coming up with arguments like, of course, like, the idea of people dying in police custody is a very real thing. These are not trivial things, these are serious things. We address these things, but like you said, we address it in the context of, as colonized people, like, and we don't just do it as like just kind of isolated incidents. We look at it in context of everything. But like, what do you make of the Black Lives Matter movement? I mean, there was action today. I think that's why we haven't had many people here actually, because I had a few emails saying that, well, actually I'm at the action today for Black Lives Matter and stuff, which is cool. But I mean, what about like some of the action that they're taking here in the UK or even the US? Like, what's kind of your analysis? I'm really, really eager to hear
I think
your
like
thoughts.
the Who movement's approach is very good. They demand community control of the police.
Yeah.
So they're not only saying they're anti-police brutality, they're saying this is our solution to this problem. So, yeah.
That's a really good way of approaching it.
How do they do that? How do they have like no kind of, they don't accept what the authority of the police in those areas?
No, obviously that's not a reality right now, but they're saying this is what we could have instead.
Right.
So, when they go out to their community, they're not just saying, oh yeah, this is really bad, let's protest about it, saying this is really bad, let's protest about it, and this is what we think should replace it.
And Black Panthers did something similar, right? They they protected their own communities, and it was called Black Panther Party of Self-Defense. This idea that we're going to defend our own communities when the police did come knocking on the doors of the black community at that time and stuff. So yeah, that's a really interesting point.
And they do that still today, don't they? They guard mosques. When there's usually like a right-wing demonstration.
Yeah.
The
Black Panther Party.
Was it the Black Panthers?
Yeah.
They came out. They were like an army. They just stood there. It was just amazing to see. And they just guarded it. And the organisation, actually the nationalist organisation, was called BEAR, which is an American, very racist right-wing organisation. They didn't even turn up. Once they knew that it was a Nation of Islam mosque. Once they knew I think was it the Black Panthers?
Yeah, it was the Black Panthers.
They were there, and they were there in uniforms. They had their guns. They were very organised, very disciplined. They had like a commander who was there, keeping them in order. It was
That's pretty cool.
Quite amazing to see.
I mean, I don't know like what the Black Panther Party is doing today in the US and stuff. Like, I'm not following too much about. I mean, they're fairly weak at the moment, aren't they, as an entity? Like, they're not as strong as they once were because obviously of like the COINTELPRO program and other kind of programs that the government essentially instituted to try and destroy that organisation, and it really did hit them. And I think that there is a sense of that as well here in British movements, like the idea that there is like infiltration and there's like these kind of things going on where there's kind of, you just want to shut down these movements. When we are organising, this is a problem as well, so when we are organising under kind of like, say, in the British society context, you've got kind of like this kind of infiltration as well, which is a problem and it's counterproductive, and it can cause like other sort of more, I guess people become scared as well, intimidated in being politicised. But is there any other comment or engagement that, do you want to touch on this, just as a comment on the Algerian resistance?
Dealing with like inside, like people, our own people who kind of go over to sell out basically.
Yeah.
How to deal with that?
You just treat them like the invader, really. So yeah, they'd obviously be on the receiving end of the anti-colonial violence because they've decided to work on side with the colonisers.
Is there any other comment, or Roland? Any comment?
I'm not sure. I mean, what I'd like to ask, sorry, what's your name again?
Awqa.
And what I'd like to ask you is, according to what you've read, as far as Fanon is concerned, from Fanon, to do with this particular book, I suppose specifically, what is his what is his idea of the role of the individual in such situations? Does he have any particular point of view as to what the individual can do, as well as the group, the social group of people who suffer this particular inequality?
I think, well, like I said, he talks about the fact that violence is inevitable, but it has to be based around ideology, and I think that would apply to the individual as well. So, on my own interpretation, that would mean, as an individual, making the effort to study and strengthen your own ideology before and during your process of doing actions, so that, yeah, it's not just spontaneous, not just based on emotions. But I don't think he specifically says anything about the individual, particularly in the chapter. Kind of talks about the urban-rural divide and particular historical examples of it from what I've read.
Yeah. I pretty much came to the same conclusion, actually. There was actually one thing that I thought it would be really cool to have you here, namely because there's a running theme throughout the book, and it's this idea of like national liberation. Is nationalism the answer? In obviously Fanon's case, it was the liberation of Algeria as a nation state, but you subscribe to beyond borders in terms of the entire continent of what is now known as South America.
Yeah, I do, but I also recognise that right now borders are
definitely
needed, and stronger
to
borders.
keep,
Like, for example, the Venezuelan-Colombian border. Colombia, which is currently being run by a Spanish descendant, the Colombian state can constantly weaken the Venezuelan state because the border between them isn't strong enough. So, yeah, I do think, obviously, in the future, it would be good to have no borders in the whole of the continent.
Yeah.
But that is obviously when
for the indigenous people.
That's obviously when the entire continent is liberated, because having one progressive state which borders one that isn't, obviously there needs to be security between them.
Yeah, for sure. And like another thing was kind of, I don't think this is language used necessarily in other kind of decolonial political theorists, but the idea of like, you know, left wing and right wing, because like say there's some arguments like the Blue movement even, like I think I haven't read enough, but like there's some arguments, this idea that we move beyond like European political spectrum, like we don't need to necessarily subscribe to the idea of like left wing, right wing, because some people would deem like say the militant left as like fairly right wing, this idea that actually we believe in borders, but we believe in borders to keep out you know, the colonizers and the imperialists, you know, like that kind of that's a fairly like so-called right-wing position from certain like soft anti-imperialists, as I try to identify them.
Well, yeah, I think I've come across people in the UK that are like really idealistic. They're like, no borders, no human is illegal.
Yeah,
but
we are
within,
treated.
Within the present day, like reality, borders are needed to protect our people back home. For example, I just said as well, and to be honest, like a European settler on any non-European land to me is illegal. So yeah, it has to be kind of said in context. But yeah, you're right, like ideas like borders should exist is considered a right-wing thing, but I think everything has to be looked at in context. And
yeah, definitely. And like, you know, with just picking up on the point again, so the idea of like, you know, zero engagement in this country and sort of like mainstream so-called political parties, I'm not for that. And sort of, I'm for kind of, you know, independent thinking and education and organising amongst our own people and everything. But like, obviously there's certain strategical and tactical points where you can engage in direct action, like for example rallying against intervention in, say, Afghanistan, or you know what I mean, so that kind of thing. But like ultimately they did it anyway. Like that's the dilemma, right? And how would you?
I think stuff like that, we have a duty to go out and
to speak in
protest
context
against
anyway,
stuff like that. Even if it's just like symbolic, even though the government will probably go ahead and do it anyway. But yeah, like I said, just protesting now and again, to me personally, isn't enough.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I'm for that too. Do we have any other contributions? James, do you have anything you want to draw from the discussion points?
Well, I was just thinking about the role of
Sorry, say that again.
I was just thinking about the role of the diaspora.
Yeah.
In it, where you were talking about those who were sort of pertaining to sort of Eurocentric values of decorum and ways of talking, culture, etc. I was thinking about, what about somebody who was born in Europe from an African country, like myself, for instance, and is kind of sort of almost like a false ethical dichotomy, where who do I sort of commit myself to? What nation, what ideology, what set of values do I commit myself to? Or can I commit to both? What are the implications of that? I suppose for me it's to try and sort of satisfy both hemispheres is to sort of dampen any notion of spontaneity, risking a sort of purely different approach to maybe trying to live in a diaspora, trying to live it as a European, but being sympathetic to what's going on in Kenya, where my mother and grandmother are from, things like that. I was just thinking about that.
So when you talk about two sets of values, you mean values here and values back home?
Yeah.
Well, since the relationship between like the global south and the global north is essentially like parasitic, I think that's why I personally have taken the decision to, despite being mixed race, having no like mixed loyalties. So my loyalties solely lie with my people in back home, because if I had mixed loyalties, then I would be basically at least partially like supporting the genocide back home. So and since British values have always kind of been deep set in genocide and theft and slavery, I think there's no way you can really balance that as well as be trying to balance the liberation of your people. I think I mentioned that. Like now and again, like you hear, let's unite us non-whites with the white working class because we've got the same struggle, but historically we don't. And realistically, if the imperialist global system was to be destroyed, then the working class here would be left with basically nothing, and then they would be demanding from their government, no, like, continue doing what you were doing, like, let's get our power back, I want my comfort back, whatever I had. I think that's something that obviously is important to highlight, but as non-white people, as colonised people in the UK, I think despite us being the recipient of the of privilege and comfort here, I think whatever we do have here, we have to remember has been taken from our people back home, and that's why we have to make an effort to do what we can to overthrow the system. Whereas if we're not doing that, then yeah, we do end up becoming the same people that Fanon condemned, the privileged, colonised minority.
Some arguments in terms some kind of people who identify as say anti-imperialist, but at the same time this idea of overthrowing the imperialist supremacist white supremacist state such as England or whatever, and or the UK as its own kind of thing. All the same, but I just guess I like to call it England because it just weakens. Because I am of the position that say, there should be a Scottish referendum and they should break off, and then there should be an Irish referendum and they should break off. Not because I care about necessarily, the Scottish or the Irish, nation state as it exists today. Irish history is different, but I'm just saying, I guess we can't really be in a position where we say, our interests, we're on the same sort of equal footing with your struggle and things like that. Because as far as I'm concerned, since the UK has emerged, Ireland and Scotland have both benefited from obviously white English, imperialist looting.
And taken part.
Exactly, and taken part. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, lost my train of thought a bit. But I guess what I'm trying to say is how do we kind of engage with so-called good white people? How do we kind of position ourselves where, the Black Panther Party, they had a split due to this kind of position, right? So you had more militant factions, which I personally adhere to. More militant factions say that there is no space for white allies, so to speak, because this is at that time there wasn't there was a need to be a close-knit community, far more militant, given what they were going through. At that time, I personally do take the position of, say, Stokey and the idea that there shouldn't have been white allies in the Black Panther Party, whereas there was other, Huey Newton was saying that there's space for that. And then there was a split, so how do we kind of engage with that kind of,
Well, I keep going back to the same example simply because the Who movement exists now, and they're kind of doing what I myself would eventually like to be part of in the future. An organisation like them, a political one, but obviously for people of indigenous descent from the so-called Americas. But yeah, they exist now, and what they do is they do work with white people, but the white people have a separate organisation, the Solidarity one or something, and they work under the leadership of the Uhuru movement.
Yeah, I saw
and
that.
They do tangible things they raise money for them and they give it straight to the organisation. So I'd say in that way that's the most.
That's actually a perfect
way.
example. I was pretty impressed because I engaged with a couple of the white who remembers, and I just thought that they were really interesting people and that there is space for that in that organisational structure. So basically the sentence that I didn't finish was the idea of referendum, of a Scottish and Irish referendum and even a Welsh referendum, breaking up of the so-called UK would actually benefit us because it weakens Westminster and they don't want it to happen anyway. The imperialists, they don't necessarily want that to happen, that breakup. And I think that disunity amongst them was kind of the start of, say, something, the idea of exercising white supremacy amongst the Europeans, because Europeans at the time, one time, the Irish were seen as the lesser European, the lesser white kind of thing, and there was kind of infighting between Europeans, and say, for them to resort back to, say, nationalism, Scottish nationalism or Irish nationalism, and it could weaken Westminster and be beneficial for us. How do we kind of approach that without compromising again and without engaging again in the whole sort of mainstream party politics? It's quite a tough one, I guess, but
I personally don't really, because if I see that is going to happen, that they're going to break away from England. There's still going to be Irish companies, and there's still going to be Welsh settlers, etc. on my land. So tangibly, I don't really see how that has a real effect on my people, to be honest. But yeah, any kind of like disunity in Europe is something that
it's strategic and it's useful.
I don't know. I find it humorous, and I find it funny seeing people freaking out about it.
That's quite funny.
I myself, I was quite indifferent with the whole Brexit thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Brexit. Yeah, for sure. Is there any other comments that to be made? Hamza, do you want to say anything or any ideas?
The one thing that I was interested in, because
amongst like comrades, colonised comrades, those always have to be made, because if you're if you're dogmatic and you're like, you don't think like I do, you don't do what I do, then obviously you're just like creating division.
It's difficult to come to terms with it in terms of reality when you do have like such severe ideological differences. It's difficult to come around to in sort of like a practical application sometimes, when people do seem to be so convinced that their end goal is, say in this country, and this is entirely, their sort of fight, and then rejecting kind of like the more severe things that are going on in sort of like lands where they are being bombed and obliterated, and infrastructure. I mean, it's cool caring about housing here, but we're talking about severe deprivation in our own homeland and so on. Where housing, no such kind of campaigning or housing sort of activism in relation to that exists. I mean, I definitely agree that being dogmatic can be highly problematic, which is why I try to even be sort of like really broad in this group as well, the idea that we do have a decolonial character of different wavelengths, politics of different magnitudes. Be respectful, let's engage in that discussion, So you had a...
Thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to say something, to everybody, but pertaining to what you said about the whole idea of someone who identifies as black and is actually a Corbyn supporter, who wants to see the rectifying of imperialism around the world. I want that, but yet I am a Corbyn supporter, because my support for Corbyn is relatively short term, because I live here.
That's a good way to look at it. Short term, I mean, that's one way.
I live here, and I live here, and I have to engage with what's happening. And I do definitely agree with your point of view. I mean, that is my point of view, that it is better that, even to use your analogy, if the burglar is stealing the loot, that this burglar is sharing the loot out more fairly than the burglar that keeps everything, amongst a very limited amount of people.
Though, but is it? Because
for me it is. For me, because it's gonna be stolen anyway, so it might as well be stolen nicely rather than And also, as far as individual, like for example, we are people of the diaspora of, say, southern nations. If we are receiving benefits, or if we have a better standard of living, we can directly help our relatives in the southern hemisphere. Whereas if we are not being given the right amount of benefits, or if we suffer a certain level of unemployment, then we're in a worse position, to be able to help anybody else, or even to survive, to be able to use our ideology to change things in the future. Because some people die, some people do starve, the benefits are cut, and they don't have family or whoever, I don't know what your personal support system is, but some people don't have that support system.
True,
So that's my point of view, and I think it very much agrees with yours, actually.
Just our relatives is individualistic.
Oh yes, but sorry, can I just say?
It takes it from political structure and obviously institutions, looking at it through sort of like the idea of like institutional racism, and taking it to, like you said, like a very individualistic level, which can be problematic in terms of the long run.
I don't want to minimise the horrible effects that what's happening to the NHS has on
Exactly,
our people, not at all.
Yeah, not at all.
But I just, after like looking at it, I don't know, scientifically, and seeing how the NHS came about and what it's funded by, I just personally don't feel that same kind of emotional investment when I hear about news about the NHS. I don't know, I see it in the context of like the whole, like the way the NHS, its relationship with the global south, and I think opposing, just focusing on what's happened to the NHS, for example, yeah, it's being like anti-capitalist, but you have to be anti-imperialist as well.
Can I just thank you personally, really appreciate you being here, and I know you're super busy and you've got a daughter. Shame I didn't get to meet her.
Yeah, no,
I haven't met her yet.
Disturbing.
Yeah, don't worry. But hopefully, I hope you can join us again. We really want to have you back. Actually, I was hoping at a future. But let's talk. But thank you, everybody. I really appreciate people coming along to these kind of discussions. Sorry, it's a bit dark, and it's getting a bit dark. But people preferred in the feedback for it to be outside. If you prefer it, otherwise just inbox me and let's talk. Okay, thanks again, everyone, and really appreciate you all coming. And until next week.
Thank you.